page of downloads. We're holding on the second paragraph in the page. And we were talking about how there's two stages in the Yid's connection with Hashem. There's the level of Kiddushin and Nisuyin, the two steps of marriage, of betrothal and the actual marriage. And these are the two ideas of Katshenu b'mitzveisecha v'seicholkeinu b'tzeirusecha. That first there's the level of the Kiddushin, Katshenu b'mitzveisecha. It's through a level of Kiddushin. That's how we make the initial union, the initial step in the union, but that's still external because mitzvahs are something done externally to the person, whereas Torah is something that's internalized. It becomes our portion. It becomes part of us. In addition to that, we say another thing as well, that it is also a higher level. Mitzvahs is only a chitzonistic level in comparison to the level of Torah, which is a pneumistic level. That's Kiddushin and Nisuyin. Nisuyin, you have that it's not just the external connection and bond, that from the word Kiddushin, that he makes his wife prohibited on the entire world like something that's from Hegdish, but rather Nisuyin is already about the union, the Yichud Pnimi. And also, we know that in that union, in the Yichud Pnimi, it's Hamshacha from the highest, most levels of the Chasn. The same thing that through the Yichud that we get with Hashem through Torah, it's Hamshacha of a higher level, of the level of the Pnimius and Asmius of Hashem, higher than what comes down in mitzvahs. And this we explained also is the order in Yetzias Mitzrayim. The going out of Mitzrayim is part of the process to reach Matan Torah. So before we have the process of Matan Torah, we have to have the mitzvahs beforehand. Even after the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim in actuality, so before they actually received the Torah, they had also the mitzvahs that they had to have in Mara. Why did they have to have mitzvahs in Mara? Because that also was a step in the preparation, like Kiddushin comes before Nisuyim, Katshena Mitzvah and then we say, okay, Mitzvah. Before we can have the idea of Matan Torah, we have to have the mitzvahs the way they were in Mara. And in a broader spectrum, in the entire world, the Torah begins with the creation. Why? Because first there has to be Koyach Mais of Higid La'amoy Noslehem Nachlas Goyim. The idea of Noslehem Nachlas Goyim is to give them the earth, give them the land. The mitzvahs are done with the land. And only afterwards does the Torah start dealing with the actual teachings of the Torah, not just the Sipurim and not and so on, because there has to be first a level of mitzvahs that has to do with Nachas Goyim, has to do with others, before we can get to the stage of Limud Torah. So now the Rebbe says these two types of stages, Kiddushin, Nisuyin, Kachein Mitzvah, Sekolkein B'Seirusecha, is also reflected in the order of the Yom Tovim that we're holding in now. We're going from Pesach, Sfiras Eimer, and then Shavuos. The Rebbe says the second paragraph on page Reish Mem Vav, Shlomo, we could say, Zel Gamma Time Malzeh. This is also for the reasons for the fact that Koidim Chag HaShavuos. That before the Yom Tov Shavuos, the time of Matan Torah, there are many and many specific mitzvahs. Mitzvahs the Chag HaPesach, mitzvahs the Sfiras Eimer. So before you have the time of giving the Torah, the time of Nisuyim, you have to have a bunch of mitzvahs. The mitzvah of Sfiras Eimer, the mitzvahs, all the mitzvahs having to do with Pesach. So the Rebbe says as follows: just like day, we know that every single day a person is considered a new creature. So Iker Limud Torah, the primary time of studying Torah, it's after fulfilling many, many mitzvahs. We have to read Kriya Shema, we have to put on tefillin, we have to tefillah, davening, and only then do we sit down to learn Torah. The fact that we're learning Torah now before davening has to do with part of the preparation for davening. But the actual mitzvah of Talmud Torah, we go, like Chazal say, the Rebbe always quotes it, mid Beis HaKnesses le Beis HaMedrash. We go from shul to learning. So it's first the mitzvahs, Bill and Davening Krishma, and then we go to learn. So just like on a daily basis, there's mitzvahs first, then there's learning. Of that, so too, it's in the calendar, it's in the times of the year. Yom Tov of Pesach, every single year, is the birth of Yidden. Just like we have that in the Haggadah, we bring from Yecheskel, that over there in that Nevuas Yecheskel, it's referring and calls the Yidden going on in Mitzrayim the birth of Am Yisrael. And since the birth of Am Yisrael in Yitzias Mitzrayim is just like everything Yitzias Mitzrayim, it repeats every single year. So then every single year by Pesach, it's a birth again of Klal Yisrael, similar to every single morning being a Bari Chadasha. And therefore, because every single year by Pesach, we are being born as Klal Yisrael, so therefore there has to be again that order. This is man after fulfilling the unique mitzvahs of these times. Mitzvahs the Chag Pesach, or the Meisvir Sa'omer, whose Mama Antar is saying there's the mitzvahs of Pesach and the mitzvahs of the days of Svir Sa'omer. That's the time of the giving of our Torah, because that's the order from mitzvahs to Torah. Oizdal, Amshir Ba Maimer, and the Maimer that have Marash, on which this is based on, continues. How does the actual Kiddushin take place? The mitzvah of Kiddushin is that the way how we are Mekadosh and Isha is we give her an item. We give her something. The poil, the minig is to give her a ring, but it's any item that has a worth of a pruta and shava pruta. It's either you can give her an actual coin that's a pruta value, or you can give her an item that's valued at the equivalent of a pruta. What's the significance of giving her a coin, giving her an item, giving her something of monetary value as part of the Kiddushin process, as part of this first stage? It says, with this coin, the woman that the person is being Mekadosh, the person is betrothing, can acquire and can buy what she needs to sustain herself, to live. So too, it's concerning the fact that Hashem was Mekadosh us with his mitzvahs. He gave us Kiddushin with his mitzvahs. Through our fulfilling the mitzvahs. So it comes down life force and vitality to the person that fulfills the mitzvahs. Like it says, like it says that a person that will do them and he will live with them and through them. So in other words, we find that the mitzvahs gives vitality to the person, just like the money for Kiddushin gives vitality to the wife. Mitzvahs are the supernal will. So what's the problem? So they're the will of the Eibishter. Why is it contradictory to what we're talking about? The mitzvahs giving vitality to the person. He says the Ratzon is a transcendent level. Ratzon on itself is something that, because it is encompassing, encircling, it's holy and separated from the world. So therefore, if it's holy and separated from the world, the idea of vitality indicates an internal type of thing. Just like when you eat food, it energizes you, it gives you chayis. How? Because you take it in. But mitzvahs is Ratz, and mitzvahs is Hashem's will. And the level of will is beyond all the worlds. It transcends the worlds. It doesn't become internalized. So how do we say that the person gets chayis from the mitzvahs for chay b'hem? He lives from it, similar to the Kiddushin money that's given, and the woman can buy sustenance, life from it. So he says, despite the fact that initially it starts off as Hashem's will, which is transcendent, Nimshach Moir is a chayis law. Adam shemakayim as a mitzvah chayis pnimi. It comes down from this light, a vitality to the person, a life force to the person that fulfills the mitzvah. It becomes a chayis pnimi, an inner type of level of chayis, a chayis that permeates the person and enters the person and becomes part of it. How do we know? Where do we see an example of this? Like it's also understood from the fact mitzvahs, that light that's drawn down through mitzvahs, it affects not only does it affect the person's thought, speech, and deed, it affects the person's character traits, it affects his will, it even affects what his delight is about. Like we brought before in Ois Aleph and Beis, we brought from the Maimer of the Reb Maran. Through mitzvahs, a person becomes separated from desires and from all bad traits. That's the idea that we said before, that he's like a gal nol, a gan nol. He's like closed off, he's sealed off from all these negative things. The idea that they bind up their entrance, that happens, that binding takes place through the mitzvahs, which that his entire delight is only in godliness. So therefore, we find that is how far the mitzvahs affect the person in an internal fashion. It's not just something that remains transcendent and outside of the person. So if so, how does that fit into what we said before? That we said before that mitzvahs in comparison to Torah is called v'seichel keinu. It becomes our portion. It enters into us internally, like the chasnas mashpia internally to the kala by the stage of nesuyim. But mitzvahs is only something external. Here we're talking about that it becomes my chayis, and not just it becomes my chayis, but it also helps the person separate himself from taivas, and it impacts his midas, and it impacts his rotzen and his tainuk. So it does seem to become internalized. So how did we say before that mitzvahs in regards to Torah is internal, and mitzvahs is only external? The Rebbe says in internal versus external, there is levels upon levels, like we always talk about. Elam, second line from the bottom of this paragraph, this entire effect that mitzvahs have to cause the person to be separated from taivas and all the bad traits, and that is delight should only be in godliness, is something, it's only in the external part of the heart. It wasn't yet absorbed in the depth of his heart. Therefore, he's called an arusa, therefore he's called only betrothed, because there isn't yet the complete union of the chasna and kala that only takes place not by the state of erusin, not by the state of kedushin, only by the following state, by the state of marriage, by the state of nisui. So now the Rebbe is going to use this to explain back to what we asked about the Targum. He had a question. The Targum said that Gan No'ul, Gal No'ul. He said, just like the Gan Eden, only tzaddikim can enter, that's Gan No'ul, but that's a mashal for how the Yidden have the Gal No'ul, that they are closing up their entranceway, they only have their delight is only for godliness. And we asked, seemingly, you could bring a more basic, down-to-earth mashal, like this David says, bring it from down here below. It's much more exact, it's much more a mashal and a nimshal type of relationship. Why does he bring the Gan Eden as an example for what the Yidden are closing themselves up and only allowing the delight of the Eibush? The Rebbe says, the last paragraph on this page, according to this, we can explain the explanation of the Targum. Gan no koil gan eden, that the closed garden, the locked garden, that first part of the puzzle is referring to Gan Eden. The only ones get enter over there is souls of tzaddik. Because this way, this idea of closing up, tying up their entranceway in the above mentioned manner, that also is the light, is only in godliness. How is that? How is that accomplished? We said before, it's through drawing down the light from above through fulfillment of mitzvahs. Therefore, the metaphor for this is, what do we bring as an example? Just like mitzvahs is like something coming from above, it's not really internalized. The same thing, he gives an example from Gan Eden, where it's the light, a godly delight that comes from above. So therefore, it's understood why he brings the Gan Eden as a mashal for this. Then he goes on to say, "V'yesh loymar," we can answer the session maybe by Maimer, top of the next page, but the reason why at the beginning of the Maimer he brings the explanation of the Targum is Pirush Zeh, why Yisoid La Bir Sheba Maimer Sha'ogdim Pischem Huin Kachena Mitzvah, because this explanation of the Targum of the Gan Eden being used as a mashal for the Ogdim Pischem, that their delight is only for godliness, is because we want to understand the Kachena Mitzvah. And just like in Gan Eden, the revelation is from above, the same thing, how mitzvahs affect us is also in a way from above, and it's only in a way of Kitzonius Alev, therefore it doesn't really permeate the person. Any questions before we go on?
Yeah, could we look at this as kind of like a warm-up? Like getting ready?
Warm up the Torah you're talking about?
Yeah, like you go to a baseball game, they have batting practice, they're stretching, they're not, they have to do it, but it's not the game itself yet.
No, because it has inherent value in and of itself. Just like Kiddushin is not just a warm-up for the Nisuyim, Kiddushin has its own value in and of itself. But as in many things, there are different stages and a progression of things that we have to go through till we reach the ultimate. So just because the ultimate is the ultimate, that doesn't mean that what we have now is not valuable in and of itself. Rather, it has its own inherent value, but in comparison to the next stage, it's only a preparatory stage.
We still have to go through it. You can't just jump to the main course.
Right, that's true, of course. You need both stages. That's why you're saying they needed to have the mitzvahs and Mara before they had Matan Torah. They needed to have Yitzias Mitzrayim. We need to have every year Yitzias Mitzrayim, Pesach, Kisdarim, Matzah, Mara, and Shiras Omer before we can approach the time of Shavuos. Or every single day, we need a daven and put on tefillin and then read Krishma before, and as an introduction to and as a lead-in to the Torah study that we do after that. Okay, let's continue. By the way, I just wanted to mention, I was going to learn some of the notes. In the notes on the previous page, he says that the idea of Torah study brings from Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, that Torah study, even though anytime a person can establish time for Torah study, that's good, and it's a very important thing. But the ideal time, the Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch, for Torah study is as soon as one is done davening, one should sit down and learn. I mean, if he wants to take a break for a short breakfast, fine. But the main thing is, there is an ideal to go from davening with all the mitzvahs that entails into Torah study. In other places in Chassidus, it says specifically to learn Nigla at that time, because then you bring it down into the lower worlds. However, that is. Okay. We're holding on the fourth page of the copies, Reish Mem Zayin Ois Hey. And even more in depth, Yeshloimar Behegdem, we could say by first prefacing, appear bezad explanation of this, Shemaidech Bahamaimer Beinyan Vesein Chalkeinu Besaresecha Shuin Al Nisui. In this Maimer, the Rebbe Marash, he speaks about at length concerning the second stage. the level of the nisui, the level of the actual marriage, the union of husband and wife, which is in mitzvahs. That's the idea of having our portion in the Torah, to have our chelik in the Torah. The L'chura seemingly had a mimer in this mimer he's explaining. He says the gan nol. What is that locked garden? What's it trying to be a metaphor for? It's katreinu mitzvah. It's not talking about the Torah part. The Torah part is like past the psukim that this mimer is referring to. It's past the gan and nol and the gal nol, the closed and the locked garden, and the mound that has a pile of rocks or whatever over the mayon is all about the mitzvahs process. So therefore, he seems to be spending an undue amount in the mimer explaining the secondary resulting thing than what the actual pasuk is referring to, the katreinu mitzvah. Why does it matter over here to explain the idea that they will give our portion in your Torah? Simply one could say, the fact that he explains over here the idea that you will place our portion in your Torah, it matters to the second part of the pasuk where it talks about the closed, the sealed mound that covers over that wellspring. Even though in the simple reading this was all about katreinu mitzvah, and v'senchalkeinu b'seiresecha was only brought to contrast and to understand this entire pasuk of gan and nol and gal nol. The Rebbe says, really, in truth, even though the Maimon doesn't say this explicitly, the second part of pasuk about this mound that covers over the wellspring, that is referring to the second part of our process after the katreinu mitzvah, the senchalkeinu b'seiresecha. Isa medrash, it's brought on the medrash. Gan Na'ul, the closed garden, Elu Habsulos. This is those that did not have any relations yet. Gal Na'ul, what's it talking about? The closed or the locked mound, Elu Habaulos. This is talking about those that have already had relations and they still are only focused on their husband and so on. That's a Some tzedek explains the God knows the first page of the pasuk, the locked garden, that's the level of the betrothed one. The gal no'ul and the closed and sealed mound over the wellspring, ubechinas nesua is the level of nesua, of the married woman. So again, you have the erisin and nesuyin, kedushin and nesuyin. You have the katrein mitzvah, and then the Sefer Kain B'Seiresecha fits in these two parts of the puzzle. If Kashas and Pirush of Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe says in the brackets, we can connect with the explanation of Tzemach Tzedek. The Gal Na'ul, the idea of a locked mound. What's the idea of this mound? Inyan Gal Einai Va'bitan Niflois M'Toresecha. It also has to do with Lag Ba'im. So this always explains Lag is the same letters like Gal, that reveal my eyes, and I will look at the wonders of your Torah. So first of all, it has to do with Torah, but not just any level of Torah, but the Gal Noel has to do with those wonders of the Torah. That's the ultimate state of Torah, Mashiach's time. We know that the main state of marriage, the ultimate state of marriage of Nisuyin, will Mashiach come. It says, by Matan Torah, we were had the kedushin with Hashem, and when Mashiach comes, that's when we're going to have the nisuyin. Why is that so? Because the ultimate level of Torah is going to be then. Even though we got Torah before, but the real Torah is going to be when Mashiach comes. Because when Mashiach comes, there's going to be the revelation of the inner part of the Torah. So therefore, it's going to be the real level of Seichel Kain B'Seiresecha, the real level of nisuyin. Avo, the Rebbe goes on to say, but that since in this Maimer, Tazriya Mitzvah, of that whole continuation of that series of Maimorim, beginning with the Maimer Matzazu. So in the Maimer of Tazria Mitzvah, he only is dealing with the Gan Nol part of the pasuk, the first step of the pasuk, Babir the Gal Nol Maskil B'Maimer Shalachra, and the explanation of the mound that seals and closes off the Mayan is really only discussed on the Maimer afterwards. The Staber Loimer makes sense to say. Why is it explained in this Maimed idea that the Seichel came to Secha, even though we're talking about the Gan Nol, and the Gan Nol has to do with the Kachen Mitzvah, not the Seichel came to Secha. So he says, because by knowing about the Seichel came to Secha that comes later, we understand more the idea of Gan Nol, the first part of the pasuk. The fact that through the avoid of the sealed garden, which is Kashen Mitzvah, we come to this second stage that will give us a portion in the Torah, which is Klita Epinemius, an inner type of absorbing of godliness. Because prior to that, we had the Amshach of mitzvahs, that through that becomes the Kiddushin in a way that you will live in them in an internalized life work. So that enables the next step of the total internalization, the internalization of a single Kain B'Sarasach. When is this revealed? This is revealed in the actual marriage of a Seichel Kain B'Sarasach, but really it starts already in Kachenu Mitzvah, and therefore it's important already in this Maimer that Marash, where it's focused on the first part of the pasuk Gan Nol and Kachenu Mitzvah, to elaborate on the Seichel Kain B'Sarasach. Last ice in the Maimer is Vav, no Gan Nol Goyim. Gal Nol Goyim, that's what it means, the sealed garden and the sealed mound. The Gan Nol, we have going to the Kiyum Mitzvahs. The sealed garden, we said, the locked garden, that's the avoid of fulfilling mitzvahs. The Gal Nol, waste Katoira, and the sealed mound, that's being involved in Torah, Befrat Pnimis HaTorah, and specifically the inner part of Torah, like we said, that's Gal Einai Van Bakbiten and Fleisman Torah Secha, which is, by the way, a title, the pasuk that the Rebbe brings down a lot of the Lag Ba'omer Mamorim, and because of the Lag Ba'omer, the Yorship the Rashbi, having to do with Pnimis HaTorah, stay avoidus. Both mitzvahs and Torah tzrichis liis by from the Mochat Keladi, but has to be in the way that initially we go over Kairos, like the directive of the one whose birthday is this Beis Year. So by Hiluch the Elchum Achayel Chayel, so too the traveling and going from strength to strength. Ma'adarg the Eris and Gal Nol, Adarg and Gal Nol from the level of betrothal, which is the sealed garden, to the level of marriage, which is the sealed mount. That the traveling and the ascent has to be in a way of initially to go over. Then when we do it in that way, so Hashem responds similarly. When we are inspired to do so down below, so then the same inspiration comes from above. That also that's what's drawn down. The revelation from above through these types of service will also be initially over. It'll be initially going over, even in comparison to the rate of going over the person. In other words, it'll be way beyond, in comparison even of the way beyond of the person. The noise of those in addition to the fact that we say in Pirkei Avos that when we do the avoid in the way that I toil, then I find, and we know what is the idea that I find in regards to toil. You should use I earned in regard to toil. Why do we use the term find? The Metzia, that I've always brings down that a found thing is incomparable to the effort that I put in. Metzia Baba Heskadas, the Gemara says that a found object is something that comes when we're not paying attention to it. Yet, even though anyway we have Yagaiti Matsasi, that the Metzia is beyond our Yigia, because we do it in avoida of l'chatchila adibur. So the way we find it is also in a way of l'chatchila adibur that Abel gives us above and beyond. The will of Hashem through speaking these matters. The frat idea avoida specifically through doing our avoiding this. Niska b'kar mamish gula asida will merit speedily mamish to the future redemption. Then there'll be the perfection of sanctifying us with your mitzvahs and giving us your our portion in your Torah. Shleimus mitzvahs, the perfection of your mitzvahs, that over there in the base of Migdash will do before you, like the mitzvahs of your will. In other words, the way you wanted the mitzvahs to be done. With Shleimus HaTorah, and then we'll also have the perfection of Torah. Torah Chadash Mitatetzi, a new Torah will come out from me. Calls a year by Ifn I feel like all this will be in such a manner that he did not delay them, even like an eye blink. Zeb Gufa but this itself in a manner of initially going over. Like Ikvan I feel like mamish that he didn't delay him, even like an eye blink, mamish. Any questions?